Good morning in North America, good afternoon in Europe, and good night or evening in Asia. What we have to talk about today is the other part of the announcement for the patch that we have not talked about yesterday, because yesterday we were more focused on the practical, on the material things of the patch, the in-game content, what will come, what could come, perhaps even what should come in the actual patch. What we're going to be focusing on today is the ethereal, is the theoretical, and a little bit less visible to the naked eye, which is the scope of the patch. What is going to happen after the patch, if anything at all is going to happen after this patch in the expansion, and what does it mean for the next expansion? Because we have also gotten, as we pointed out yesterday a tiny bit, quite a few comments related to the story, the state of the story, what was this going to mean for the story progression of World of Warcraft, whether or not you care about this. It's still interesting to look at this from the perspective of what's going to happen after this whole thing, this whole perhaps even mess ends. Because what happened about 10 days ago, before we even knew anything about this patch, was that Hazzikostas was being interviewed, and he was talking about a few things that were being asked multiple times, like cross-faction raiding, the philosophy behind allowing covenant swapping, etc, etc. But one comment that stood out initially about his interview was the future, about the 9.2 patch and forward, because he himself was saying that 9.2 was coming and you will be hearing about that more soon, which, you know, it was true. We did hear about that pretty soon. But he also said we do have more planned after that, but it's hard to say too much without almost spoiling some of the story that's going to come. We will have a lot of details on that soon, but we want to be able to explain in the full context of what 9.2 is going to be. So he was saying before we even got any news about 9.2 that there is going to be something after this patch. So, as speculated before, it was likely that 9.3 wouldn't have happened as a major patch, but it was possible that 9.2.5 or 9.3 would have been released as, you know, minor patches, closing out all of the loose ends, tying up some of the parts of the story, etc, etc. Then, what we have gotten was the announcement for 9.2. And a few other things came to mind when it comes to the future of the progression for the game, because one of the things that we pointed out yesterday was how often they were repeating that this was going to be the final act of the story, that this was going to be the tying storyline that started all the way back since the original Warcraft, which is something that they are still catching flack for, because people are getting borderline offended at the idea that some of these storylines dating back to even things like Arthas in Wrath of the Lich King were somehow, some way tied to this thing that is happening in Shadowlands. Because Sylvanas's prime simp himself, Steve Danuser, said, we set out to plan the Shadowlands story as this drama in 3 acts. We have intended for Eternity's End to be the culmination of that story. Not only that, but he also further explained that there is going to be more content to come in Shadowlands, but the patch 9.2 is going to be the grand finale regarding the story itself. This point was further driven in by saying that Shadowlands was planned as a total of 3 chapters before the pandemic, and that has never changed, that there has never been any artificially reduced, adjusted or delayed content to match the next expansion pack cycle. So many people are currently still speculating that, you know, Blizzard had to change something along the way. For example, that this pseudo Worlds of Draenor expansion, where they have to drop the expansion itself by patch 0.2, just like happened in Warlords, is something that they have to do last minute or as an emergency button, whereas here they are saying that this was always planned to go out this way. 3 chapters, 9.0, 9.1, 9.2, and nothing else as far as the story is concerned. This was then further extended once again by Steve Danuser, which is the lead narrative designer, and by Morgan Day, which is the lead game designer, where they point out that the story is going to see the threads coming together throughout the Warcraft history, and this is going to be the culmination of this storyline, but that, of course, things don't simply end after defeating a raid boss. There is going to be the campaign, the story within the raid, the epilogue after the end of the raid, and some epic conclusions waiting for you once the raid is over. So there are hints, or maybe not even hints, straight up confessions that it's not that even though the patch is going to tie up the story that they drove up to this point with Shadowlands, it's not going to be the end of the expansion. At the same time, this is not how any other expansion has worked before. Usually, if you're waiting for a 9.3 patch, that's because the end boss is there. That's because the big end of the expansion is there. Wrath of the Lich King ended with Ice Crown, which had the Lich King as the end boss. You had Cataclysm, which was about Deathwing, and Deathwing was the end boss in the end raid. You had Mists, where the end boss was Garrosh, and you got it. Same thing goes for Legion, where the enemy was the Legion, and the last patch was the Legion. BFA also, we might not have started knowing that it's gonna be about old gods, but we all knew that the whole faction war wasn't going to last the entire expansion, and that Battle of Dazar'alor was gonna be pretty much the end of the faction war until the actual bad guys of the expansion would have showed up, and they did, Ajara and N'Zoth. So all the previous expansions did have their last bad guys in the last patch, in the last raid tier. So this is the first time, pretty much, where we get the bad guy, the evil villain of the expansion in a 0.2 patch. So even if the expansion is going to continue, it's still worth pointing out that it's not going to be like we have seen before. It's not going to be an escalating threat patch after patch after patch, getting rid of henchman after henchman after henchman until we finally reach the evil mastermind. The evil mastermind is going to be taken down in 9.2, so something else must happen in 9.2.5 or 9.3 or whatever they come up with in this expansion. Now, I pointed out my headcanon before, given what we have seen in these interviews. I thought several weeks ago, long before we knew anything about 9.2, and we barely knew actually at the time 9.1.5 in detail, what I pointed out is that the next expansion, also known as 10.0, was going to be a pretty significant milestone for the game, because, you know, it's the 10th installment of the franchise. 9 expansions and 1 base version. So it is room for a lot of easy and simple marketing and advertising. The anniversary of World of Warcraft games, this one being the 10th, it's also a pretty round number, a pretty checkpoint type of number that you reach. So I thought it was going to be pretty important to them, to Blizzard, to be able to have a nice start, a nice presentation of this expansion, because it is an eventful one, and that it would have also given them some easy ways to advertise and promote the expansion because of all the stuff tied to the anniversary, etc., of the installments of WoW. And because that reason, I thought it would have been unlikely that this story would have continued. You know, getting to this check mark, to this 10th installment, would have also been a great way, a great reason to sort of reset the story, to sort of start with a different one, to reset the clock and start from somewhere else compared to where we have gone recently. Because the stakes in the expansions have been progressively rising over and over since pretty much Worlds of Draenor. We finished Mists, where the enemy was pretty much a faction leader that we have heard about and seen for years, which was Garrosh. Yes, there were the old gods in there as well, but primarily it was still Garrosh. And then after that, we started getting into the sci-fi type of genre, because with Worlds of Draenor, we started getting the Legion. We started getting spaceships and enemies from other planets, etc., etc. This escalated even more in Legion, where we didn't have enemies from other planets. We went to their planet instead. Even more magic, even more high stakes. Now you have a gigantic god demon that is trying to stab an entire planet with a sword. That was the level of the stakes that were being played in Legion. BFA probably did not go as high as Legion, but it still had one of the last remaining old gods as the main enemy. And now that we've gotten Shadowlands, we have once again escalated even more, because now apparently the jailer was behind everything. It's even stronger than anything we have seen before, and now we are going to enter a realm, Zereth Mortis, which is basically the primordial broth of the universe where everything gets created. As I pointed out yesterday, there is no more to go than down after this. You can't one-up this thing in another expansion, and it would have felt weird for the 10th installment of WoW, the 10th version of the game, to just continue a story story you started previously. It would have made much more sense to simply restart somewhere else. You know, pick a card, any card in the WoW lore, and start from there. Do you want to go for Dragon Isles? Do you want to go into the universe of the Void Lords? Do you want to pull back the Bronze Dragonflight and go back in the past somewhere cooler? You name it. Whatever. And this feeling is getting strengthened by the comments we have seen recently. I sort of put this back on the shelf after thinking about this based on the timings of the patches of this expansion, whether or not we would have had the time for a 9.3 patch that we discussed before. But now that we have gotten all of these comments from the developers of the game related to being very certain and very sure that this patch is going to tie up the story that started for the Shadowlands part, then it makes you wonder what's going to happen after. What is going to be the continuation? My very positive Hopium take when I first theorized this was that 9.2.5 or 9.3 would have been a minor patch that would have helped to set the tone for the next expansion. It would have helped present what was going to happen in the next expansion. Let's just assume, okay, let's just imagine that in 9.2 the jailer is defeated, Sylvanas completes the totally not foreshadowed and assumed redemption arc where she sacrifices herself to take the place of, I don't know, the place of the Arbiter, who by the way is still sleeping and doing fuck all this expansion, perhaps takes the place of the jailer himself or something like that. Now there is nothing else to do. The jailer has been defeated, Sylvanas' threat has gone away, but the expansion is still running. The devs keep saying there is going to be something more after 9.2 and there's going to be an epilogue. So, considering this story being over, the most likely scenario, the most logical assumption I could make is that they are planning 10.0 to be a completely different expansion story-wise, in terms of threats, danger, perhaps even new characters or old characters coming back, and they need a precursor patch to set the tone. As I said, at this point it's almost certain there's not going to be a major raid tier, there's not going to be a major patch with another major enemy. As they said, the story ends here, so it would be super weird if we get rid of the jailer and then all of a sudden we get, hey guys, there is a new 9.3 patch with a 12 boss raid about Murlocs, because Murlocs are fucking angry and they are now pestering humans in the shores of the wetlands. You have to go and save them. That doesn't make much sense. So there is likely not going to be anything like that, anything of the sort, but there has to be something. They have said so themselves. There has to be an epilogue, a continuation of the expansion without anything too major. So that is more or less the only thing that can come to mind when I think about it. And to me personally, of course, from my own point of view, it would also be the best possible solution. Imagine Blizzard is already thinking of restarting the story in 10.0, because, as I pointed out, there is no more to go than down in terms of the threat scale of this game, and the jailer thing is gonna get tied up, thank fucking god, in 9.2, so they are thinking about that for the next expansion, which means it's gonna leave them some room in the next patch, 9.3, 9.2.5, whatever, to set the scene for the next expansion. That is what I think would play the best when it comes to the presentation of the next title of the game. Now, this was my point, so it's time to you to let me know what is your point of view related to this. I made quite a few videos already putting out the question of whether or not you would have rather had a longer expansion that could have fit a 9.3 patch, so delaying the next expansion at the benefit of having an extra patch in Shadowlands, or if you would have rather taken the expansion maintaining a 2-ish year cycle if it only meant having 9.2 as the last major patch. At this point, we have pretty much the answer, so we are only going to have 9.2 as the main patch of the expansion as the last one, so everyone who preferred that is gonna get their way. But you can still tell me what you think about this from the story perspective, if you would have rather wanted to continue, and if you even knew about any higher stakes of threat that Blizzard could have come up with in the first place after the jailer, or if you would rather marry my theory of being able to reset the story, the stakes on the expansions in 10.0 and stopping at 9.2 and leaving the rest of this expansion to set up the tone and the theme for the next expansion. Now, with this, we can stop and let you go have the rest of your weekend off. Thank you, as usual, for watching the video. If you want to continue supporting the channel or start supporting the channel if you want to, if you might be so inclined, you can leave a like on the video as well as comment down below, because these are the rules set by YouTube. But then also, after careful consideration, you can subscribe to the channel, but only and specifically if you have a tier 3 OnlyFans sub with Sylvanas. Otherwise, you're not allowed in here. Thank you guys for watching, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, I said it as a joke, but I still totally want a Murloc raid, by the way, just to be clear.